Hello, hello. This is Danielle Ireland, and you are listening to Don't Cut Your Own Bangs. And I am thrilled to be introducing to you one of my nearest and dearest people in my life. They're an extension of family at this point. They started off as a teacher, professor, became a mentor, and has just continued to be a lifelong friend. It's friend, uncle, mentor, adopted family member, however many friendly adjectives you want to throw in. But all that to say, this is someone that I care greatly for. And I'm so honored, not only that I got to spend an hour of time with him catching up, but also that I now get to share a slice of him with you all. So this is Dr. Michael O'Hara, Mike O'Hara for short. But just to give you a little bit of background of who he is professionally and all of his fun, shiny medals. And then I'll share a little bit of context of our relationship, because as it tends to happen when you reconnect with someone you haven't seen in a long time, we just kind of jumped into talking a little quickly. And if you don't have context, it may seem kind of abrupt when you just start to listen to the interview. But to give you a little context of Dr. Michael O'Hara, he is a CIRSA Distinguished Professor of Fine Arts and a Professor of Theater at the Theater and Dance Department of Ball State University. Ball State University is where David Letterman went to school, so NBD, not a big deal, but also kind of an amazing deal. It is where I subsequently received my bachelor's degree and had an incredible experience there. And Michael is one of the key reasons, not only for me being excited to be a part of the program, but he was a big slice of the pie of my emotional guidance at a very formative time in my life. And also not just simply because of his instruction and his role professionally as a teacher, but also just who he embodies. I think he models, just going to give a little personal insight, I think he models really what it is to be in a safe space. He doesn't necessarily offer unsolicited advice. He doesn't just throw out and tell you what he thinks you should do if you don't ask for it, which is, I think, as a teacher, in the best sense of the word, he's a safe space for you to make mistakes and try to find your own answers. But he can provide structure and context and information when asked for to really help you better understand yourself. And I think that's the most beautiful expression of what a teacher can be. He's also married to a gem, Dr. Laura O'Hara, who's also a tenured professor at Ball State. Just want to give a shout out to Laura because she, by proxy, has also become, an aunt and just an extended member of the family. And she is an absolute, they're not only two of the best people, but they're just incredible educators. So anyway, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Michael. So Michael O'Hara, pronouns he, him, is a professor of the Theater and Dance Department. He teaches theater history and Introduction to Theater. So Introduction to Theater is for students who are non-theater majors. He also writes, directs, and acts for theater and film. He received Ball State University's Outstanding Junior Faculty Award in 2002. That's right before I started college. And the Lawhead Teaching Award in 2001. And the University Excellence in Teaching Award twice, once in 1999 and again in 2005. So he also won the Dean's Teaching Award. There's a long list of awards in his bio, so I'm not going to embarrass him by reading it all, but you could also Google it. If you want to Google Michael O'Hara at Ball State University, his bio will pop up. But he's a published author. He's written a digital theater textbook. He is a highly regarded and very awarded and esteemed professor. And he's tenured, which means he's got a job for life. So he doesn't have to try anymore. He doesn't have to try, and he does. That's another thing that makes him amazing. So a little background, when I applied to go to Ball State University and audition for the theater department, I was so green. I knew nothing. My only theater experience was the one or two high school plays that I had done in my high school and maybe one civic theater production prior to that. I knew more about the Die Hard movies and Lethal Weapon and The Matrix than I did about Bernard Shaw or any other great theater author. This is embarrassing that I'm stumbling over this right now. But I knew more about, John Woo directing Mission Impossible 2 than I knew about theater. And so now insert me auditioning to the theater and dance department, didn't know my left foot from my right foot or stage left from stage right. and was lucky that him and a couple of other professors saw something in me that they thought would be of value to the theater department. And my whole college experience is better for that. And I ended up working for him. That was my college campus job. Sophomore year of college, I applied to be his assistant. And it was tremendous. I helped him edit papers and grade some papers from his Theater 100 class. And just subsequently, we developed a friendship and he got to know my family. And we have dinner together twice a year, every year since I graduated. And he's just tremendous. And I think one of the other things that marks him and makes him just not only an incredible person, but educator is I am not the only student by far. I mean, we end up talking about this in the episode, but he has taught at least 10,000 plus students in his Theater 100 class alone, which is not the only class he teaches. And also having created a digital theater textbook, who knows how many other people have seen his work or been affected by his teachings that didn't physically sit in his class. But, I felt like the most important person that he was talking to whenever he would be working with me. And I know that he has had that same impact on so many other students, hundreds of other students, many at the time that I was still a student at Ball State. So he's lovely and he is a wealth of knowledge. And we do spend a good part of the first maybe 10, 15 minutes of the episode talking about George Bernard Shaw, which if you are not a theater historian and if you are not a theater buff, you may think, why are we talking about George Bernard Shaw so much? And what I want to encourage you to do, to trust me, keep listening, because there are elements of that part of the conversation that get looped back and connect back at the end. So we start a little bit in some heavier theater history work, and it loops back around as we continue to process the right kind of hard, which is the context and the structure for what we're really talking about this season. We hit all the emotional points that you would hope to hear in a Don't Cut Your Own Bangs episode. We get there, and I just want you to trust me, and hopefully you'll begin to trust Michael that where we start will be very relevant to where we end. And it all connects. And it's really good. It's a content heavy episode. And also just want to say thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. I haven't done an interview in a little bit, and it was great to get back into the interview chair. And hope you're ready to sit back, relax, and enjoy listening to myself and Dr. Michael O'Hara. Friends and listeners, I have a very distinguished, and if you listen to the intro, you already know how distinguished, but I'm not going to distinguish him in front of you. But I have not only a very distinguished guest, maybe one of the most awarded guests I've had on the show. I could probably say, but also a longtime friend, mentor, and fellow lifelong learner and teacher, Mr. Michael O'Hara, Professor Dr. Michael O'Hara. This is fun. I feel like when I'm having a moment where there's not as many opportunities to revert back to an emotional age when you just click into a conversation with someone, and I feel like I'm perpetually 19.
Yeah, well, that was more than 20 years ago.
That's so weird. That's so I just started to sweat. But yeah.
You think it's weird for you?
Yeah. Time. I don't know. Maybe I need to devote a season of the podcast to time and how wild it is. And just to take a little train of thought, that is essentially the work of internal family systems and inner child work, is you go through life as you, and then you wake up and 30 years have gone by or 20 years have gone by.
Right. But on the other hand, when you get that opportunity, at least in my case, and I think so in your case as well, you look back and go, wow, I've changed a lot.
Yeah.
And most of it for the better.
Hopefully. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. That's certainly a more positive way of looking at it, as opposed to, oh shit.
Yeah.
It's more through the lens of, wow, I've grown. And that's the hope. And I will say that's also one of the things that I really respect about you so much, is that your interest, not only in educating, but your own interest in finding things of interest, of being curious and continuing to grow. That's probably why you have so many awards and accolades that you don't hold in such high esteem because those were awarded in the pursuit of something else. Those weren't the pursuit.
Yeah, I grow very wary and weary of the people. Fortunately, I don't know a lot of people, but I know some who are intent on creating sort of mini me's. I've only been successful in educating you if you believe the things I believe and do the things I do. And there are those few who do that. And I also don't like prognosticating about the future because it is so unknowable to us. And of course, when you were a young 19-year-old, you had dreams of stardom in your eyes, and you have accomplished many things along the way. But in some ways, you've accomplished something greater. And I celebrate that as much as I celebrate everything else.
Aww.
You're a true friend, and you have a lovely family, and can't wait to see the next edition coming along.
Oh God. Well, so just then by the next edition, he hasn't met our son yet, but so there's not a third edition coming.
No, I'm sorry. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So just to create a little context, and this may be somewhat redundant from what's in the separate intro, but yes. So I was a theater student. I almost said theater history. I was a theater student at Ball State University. I graduated high school in 2003. So 2003 was when I would have started. And you won a Distinguished Professor's Award in 2005.
No, yeah, maybe.
So yeah, so many. It's hard to keep track. But no. So I think I entered the theater program in 2003 and graduated in 2007. Yeah, that's right. And then so this is why this is one of the great aspects of exploring what is the right kind of hard. So I think that this could be approached in a couple different ways, but the two that I'm interested in is what is the difference between hitting a dead end versus a growth edge? Like I'm at the very edge of what I'm capable of doing, and through either perseverance or information, support, access, and that little sprinkling of, fairy dust, I can push through, versus this is a block, this is a dead end, and I need to make an about face and make a change. And another is forcing something to be what it isn't versus creating the change that you want to see.
Sometimes it's hard to tell, but a good guide, at least for me, is how long you've been doing the thing. So if you've been trying something for a very long time and you've not made any progress on it and nothing seems to be working, then that's probably going to be a dead end. You don't know. I mean, there is no way of knowing, because Bernard Shaw didn't write a hit play until he was 41. There's numerous examples of people kind of coming into their own somewhere along their journey. But what often, a big difference for me is, A, how long you've been doing it. And so if you've just started something, just because you're stymied doesn't mean it's a dead end. You have to have time invested, and you got to give it some time so you can be more confident in knowing whether or not it's a dead end or something that's just maturing slowly and will eventually bear fruit.
You are, I'm trying to think of the right language, but you study Bernard Shaw.
Yes.
You're a treasurer in like
of the International Shaw Society, and I have been a longtime member, and I've written a number of articles on Shaw.
But hearing you describe it as he didn't have a hit until he was 41, I would wonder, based on what you know, and if only we could bring him here. But if striving for the hit was the goal, he may have spent 41 years feeling like a failure, or let's say 31 years feeling like a failure.
Longer than that. So, it's actually a pretty good example of what you're talking about. He wanted to be a writer. He left Ireland when he was a young man. He was 19 years old, and joined his mother and older sister in London. And he got a job writing for newspapers, which paid almost nothing. And he was living in distinguished poverty, but poverty nevertheless. He would go to the British Library every day and educate himself. So he was sort of self-taught in that way. He tried his hand at a lot of things. He was modestly well known. He joined a group of original thinkers called the Fabian Society, which were interested in introducing socialism to England without violence. So rather than having some sort of overthrow of capitalism, they wanted to plant seeds along the way and then transform society from the inside out. There was a period in time when the labor movement in England was very strong, and it was able to accomplish a number of things. England was, beat us to the punch in terms of national health care and all those other sorts of things. They are a far more supportive social safety net society than we are. And Shaw has some responsibility in that. He and his wife also founded the London School of Economics, which has contributed to that kind of dialogue worldwide as to, how can we make capitalism more humane? But Shaw, he wrote 5 novels and was never able to get any of them published in any kind of way to gather any kind of attention. And he did have some success writing as a music and theater critic, and some of his music writing is considered some of the best music criticism in the world.
Could you, for some of the listeners that aren't as familiar with theater or musical theater, can you rattle off maybe some of Shaw's most famous, top 5 works?
So in terms of music criticism, his best one it's called The Perfect Wagnerite. And it's a criticism and explication of Richard Wagner's operas and music. Shaw was a big fan, and in part because he understood and knew that Wagner was changing the way opera was being done because he cared about the total experience. So he was not only writing the music and he had people help him write the story, he was also exercising a large degree of control over the lights, the sound, everything, how the audience was arranged, everything. And so Wagner contributed enormously to the experience of going to a modern theater or modern opera today. Wagner was responsible. And Shaw saw that before other people. He also, he wrote under the pseudonym Cornetto di Basso, which is a play on a cornet and a bass. He was very witty and very humorous and was popular in his day. But he started writing plays after he was inspired by Ibsen, who had written the first modern play.
So he had written 5 novels that weren't published.
Some were published, but they were not hits.
Okay. They were published, but they weren't hits. And then he shifted to playwriting.
Then he shifted to playwriting. And he wrote a couple of plays that garnered immediate attention because they were controversial. Widowers' Houses was about slum housing in London. Mrs. Warren's Profession was about prostitution.
Mm.
And so these were taboo topics to be bringing up in 1892. But it wasn't until he wrote Pygmalion that he finally had a hit. Now, he had his first play that he wrote, which was like his 7th play was Arms and the Man, which was not very popular in London, but Richard Mansfield in America performed it, and he had a legitimate worldwide hit. And so Richard Mansfield made Shaw a millionaire, and which allowed him to finally marry his wife, who was an Irish heiress. And so Shaw didn't feel like he could marry Charlotte until he had achieved some measure of success.
Like Gatsby. But I want to create a little through line for anyone listening who might be a millennial, elder millennial, or some other degree. So Pygmalion was what My Fair Lady was based off on, which is one of, and then it became a musical. So there's been tellings and retellings of stories that a lot of credit is due and owed to Bernard Shaw. But I'm even hearing you tell a little bit of his history. You mentioned, 5 novels and 7 plays, and it didn't really hit, didn't really pop, but he kept doing it. So you, as someone who is, you're a performer and you're a director and you create shows and you also create original works, and you also are walking students through their own journey of trying to make and build and make and build. It brings me back to how, in your observation, or maybe from your personal experience, where do you see people maybe hit a block and pull away prematurely from the sting of rejection or the sting of discomfort? Where do you see people maybe pull back and stop too soon?
In general, I think that the people who pull back and stop too soon, they want something other than the joy of accomplishing the task.
Yes. Their pursuit is the thing, not the process.
Right. And so they want fame or fortune or adulation or attention, or, they want these other things rather than listening to whatever it is they're doing, whether they're writing or acting or singing, whatever. They're doing it so they can do that thing in a way that they're proud of and that they can do it better and better. People who do that, who become interested in a thing and then follow that thing, they're the ones who eventually become successful. Shaw loved language but hated school. And so he taught himself, and he eventually became one of the acknowledged masters. And he was, when he died in 1950, he was the most famous man in the world.
I did not know that. That's really interesting. I can relate to, and I'm trying to personalize that a little bit of wanting the accolade more than loving the process. I'm thinking back to when I graduated and the plan was to move to LA. Because I mean, I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, how I was a theater major and then came back and taught dance for a number of years before doing what I do now. And I loved the process of making and collaborating. And I actually really got good at the auditioning process, but I realized visiting Los Angeles versus looking to uproot and move there, it wasn't a lack of love of the thing. I realized I didn't love the thing enough to want to work as hard as I knew I would have had to work. Or not, it wasn't even about the effort. It was like, oh, the toll that it would take for me to really do this thing that I love. But I guess the opportunity cost, there was an imbalance that I didn't know was there until I was actually faced with the decision. And so that's an example of, I don't look back and think, oh, I should have gone. I'm thankful that I don't live with that regret. But it's just an interesting thing of, I blindly believed up until the moment it came for that fork in the road of, okay, it's time to get a place to live. It's time to get an apartment. It's time to move, and just no. But I've hit so many moments where I was in life since then where it wasn't that clear until it was.
You actually gave yourself a great gift when you were able to see that clearly. And not all kids can do that. The example that I would give is sort of the opposite is Liz DeVito, whom she preceded you by a couple of years, but not very much. And she has had a long and engaged career as a theater artist in New York, and she's worked with a small group of people. They're called the Anonymous Ensemble, and they do some very interesting work, but it's pretty out there, and they're very politically committed, and they have a vision of what they're trying to do. It's just not going to probably ever bring a large audience. But she spent a year in Greece collaborating with the Greek National Opera to create an original work based on work that company had done on Oedipus when they first got together. And so they sort of came to fruition. And they've created many wonderful works of art, and I've been a happy patron of her theater group for many years. And she has come to terms with this is what I'm doing. And so she doesn't regret those other things, but she didn't know she had that fork in the road until she was sort of halfway down it.
Oh, yeah. Yes. I mean, because sometimes a decision is made for you, and sometimes
Right.
you're halfway through making a decision before you know.
So I think that and to tie it back to your example, the real trick, I think, is to understand that you've reached this place and then make your peace with it. Or not even make your peace with it, embrace it as the path you're on.
That almost feels like it has to be a two-part step. You have to embrace, I embraced that I needed to make a change, but I don't know if I made peace with it the entire time, like however long I taught dance after that. I think that's probably what led me to become a therapist, was I was trying to heal I was trying to reconcile that shift. And that took a lot longer than I realized. I also had to become a therapist before I recognized I had my own healing work to do. I wanted to be the expert before I wanted to be vulnerable. It feels like you went from one form of education to another form of higher education, all the while staying involved in the creative arts. And then you got your job at Ball State University. You became a tenured professor. Your wife's a tenured professor. I mean, it just feels clean and straight and narrow, but I'm sure when you were in the one, navigating those choices, it didn't feel that way. So did you personally navigate knowing what is something you need to stop, or when is something you need to pause and revisit? And if I could kind of direct where that answer might go, you created a digital theater history textbook, and it republished in its second edition in 2020. And I was a part of the first iteration of that textbook, and that process. And I'm curious about it because I know it had hit. I was kind of witness to a lot of the start stops and a lot of the the sputters and the breaks. And that was something you really had to push uphill. So how did you know? Or maybe didn't know, but how did you figure it out?
Well, I grew up, my father worked for IBM. So I've been around computers a long time. I mean, I was an 8-year-old when he was introducing the IBM 360, but revolutionized business computing in America and helped send a man to the moon. And he had a very successful career. And so you can imagine my father's disappointment when he came home when my third youngest sister, who is deaf, he came home from work and discovered that my mother had bought an Apple IIe for my little sister because it had desk accessible programming, and the IBM PC Junior, which was its competitor, did not. But I had been aware of those sort of engagements with technology and learning from that early moment. So technology was something that was sort of in what I was doing. And I noticed that the textbook publishing was making almost no progress towards it when I first started. And so I had a good feeling that we were going to move to this platform in meaningful ways. I just didn't know how. And my first iteration was literally a video game where you would explore a theater and you'd have to figure out puzzles to turn things on and make them work, and then you could see how they worked and all that kind of stuff. So it was somewhat along the lines of the game Myst. And so I had sort of adapted that into this idea, which got some interest, but nobody wanted to spend the money to actually make it happen. So I had to sit on the idea for a couple of years until Ball State was fortunate enough to get a Lilly grant that was focused on taking technology to the next level in terms of pedagogy. Now my idea had a perfect fit. I mean, I'm so lucky that I was at Ball State when this happened. And so I got a grant, quite a good chunk of money, and we sort of proposed and designed the project. Now, I was able to get the grant because I had previously gotten a Virginia Ball Creative Inquiry grant, which a group of students in 2002 created a DVD that was meant to supplement current textbooks. And that actually did fairly well. And so we created this DVD that was called Explore Theater, a Backstage Pass. And it basically took the concepts that were in most theater textbooks for Intro to Theater and gave visible examples of it so you can watch it. It didn't do too badly. And so when this grant came around, I proposed to the publishers of the CD that we make it its standalone textbook. And we're like, great, what do we have to do? And I was like, nothing. I'll let you know when it's ready. And they were like, perfect. And so and you, of course, were a very important part of that project. And I discovered in hindsight that we did far more than we needed.
Well, just to create some context. So not only was Michael or Professor O'Hara, along with two other co-authors, right?
Yeah, an editor, and then I had a playwright, and I had a co-author.
So they not only is the entire, I mean, assuming if you haven't held a textbook, you are familiar with what a textbook is. And so Theater 100, so it's laying the groundwork. So they also wrote as a part of this textbook separate, it's like a separate and in addition to an original play called Two Character Play. And then Michael directed that and then documented that as a part of the textbook. And then it was adapted to a movie or a short film. Then that was also made as a separate project and documented to incorporate as a part of the textbook. So all of these parts, and again, going back to the right kind of hard, that was a project from, that would be a really interesting idea, 2002, to when it was actually done.
Yes. And I think a good example of that is I want you to think back to the times when we were, 3 or 4 of us, depending on the day, we're all sitting in that office of mine, each of us in front of a computer, each of us furiously editing various parts of this to try to come together in some sort of cohesive whole. And of all the stuff we edited, we ended up using about half of it.
Oh my God.
Which was heartbreaking to me in some way because we worked so hard on it.
Yeah.
But that was hard work that we were doing, and it worked. It worked out.
Well, and I wonder too, I think what interests me about people who do things that I don't know how to do, I have a hard time wrapping my head around conceptualizing that because that's not my world, but just to create a little bit more context for the listener. So not only are all the things that are in the intro true, but you've taught Theater 100, which is an introduction to theater. It's a course that students can take that are not theater majors, that are just trying to get some prerequisites in. So you're teaching theater and theater history to non-theater students. And you've done that is it every year or every semester?
Almost every semester.
Okay, but this is one of those giant lecture halls and that's how I got really more acquainted with you, because I became You were
my student assistant. You're the one who you showed up in a suit and you were ready for an interview. And the two other candidates did not.
Man, it pays to care a little bit.
Yeah.
So that your class had average what, 150, 100 students?
The maximum enrollment is 200. And when you were helping me supervise the class, it was usually 190, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Let's just say 200, about twice a year, 400 since 2002.
Well, actually, since 1997.
Okay, so that's a lot of math. Can you do some fast math? How many thousands is that?
Well, I didn't teach it while I was associate dean.
Oh, right, because that's not in the intro. You were associate dean of the theater department. Yeah, so that's a title that came and went. You know, you can only serve so many terms as president. What I'm wondering is if there's also, in terms of knowing the right kind of hard, there also is a certain level of, or even to think of Shaw as an example too, a certain level of mastery. Like when you've had so many practice hours, so many at-bats, there's a certain level of competency and practiced application and that repetition over time to really help you know with confidence, this is something that can, should, and or will eventually happen, as opposed to this is something that needs to stop. Because I'm thinking about not just in pursuit of, because I think there's in pursuit of goals, but also in relationships. Like, how do you know you're doing the right kind of hard? And because I pulled that term because it's a vernacular I hear a lot in sessions or in like the mental health or emotional wellness space. You know, you got to do the work. And I'm using air quotes, like do the work. You got to do the hard work. And I see a lot of people hitting their head against a brick wall, really busying themselves and being hard on themselves, but conflating that with doing the work and knowing, am I inching the dial in the direction I want it to go? Or am I just sort of running a vacuum cleaner that's unplugged?
That's a really good analogy, because the way I would sort of deal with that is that just to finish the quick math problem, I've probably taught in excess of 10,000.
Oh.
That's probably where my number is, give or take a little bit. Every time I am in front of either a student or a bunch of students, the challenge is still fundamentally the same. Try to understand where they are and what things I can do to help them take steps in their learning. And the answer is never the same, never the same. And sometimes it's kind of the same, but there's always something that's different. And I can tell you that in this post-COVID world, it's a lot different now. Always, the right kind of work has to do with the fundamentals of the thing you're doing. And so with me, the fundamental thing I'm doing is I'm teaching students. I'm not teaching the book. I'm not teaching, a concept. I know there are professors who will say it like that, but for me, I'm always teaching the student, and I have to figure out who that student is or students are. There are some things that remain the same from year to year, but there are other things that I change quite deliberately because it's not working anymore.
So you almost ask yourself the same question every time.
Yes.
But then you allow yourself the flexibility to adjust to whatever that answer reveals itself to be every time.
Yes. And I think if you are engaged in a process where you're focusing on a fundamental foundational thing and trying to do that thing better and better, then you're going to progress. And if the question you're asking yourself is, why haven't I gotten the thing I want? What am I doing wrong? You're not asking the right question.
That's because what I like about most things that are true multiple ways. And I can think about that, how that could also apply to relationships. If I'm trying to force someone to do the thing I want them to do or be who I want them to be, whether it's a student in a classroom or in a marriage or in a family relationship, rather than how can I show up to be the person I want to be in this relationship? And how can I align that with my values? And in your case, how can I align that with what the objective is, which is to teach the student rather than force the student to walk away with what the textbook says they should know? That's right. So good.
Yes, and that's a really good example, because we tend to forget that the foundational, fundamental things are simple and repeated. And, when we focus on outcomes, yes, outcomes are important, and we have them and we measure them, especially in education. We have educational outcomes. But if what you're focusing on is the outcome and not the process, that leads into it. And you have to you kind of have to sort of not care about the outcome, because if you're authentic to the process, the outcome is likely, not guaranteed, but it's likely.
Yes. So you're trusting the process more than trying to rigidly control the outcome.
Yes. Because if I'm a good partner in a relationship, then I'm likely to come to a new balance or agreement or understanding with my partner that will make the relationship better, and I'll get what I want. Probably. I might not get everything I want, but if there's something that we are having a conflict over, we will no longer have the conflict. If I focus on the fundamentals of just being in a relationship in authentic ways and listening as much as I'm talking, sometimes more listening than talking.
And also thinking about the process over the outcome, I think that is inherently more vulnerable, because you're going on the hike knowing where you want to get to the summit, but you have no idea how the experience of the hike will be.
Right. But if I can focus on the fundamentals of making sure I'm dressed properly or whatever, and that the person I'm going with is of the same understanding, then we will find all the trail markers eventually and make our way up.
So where do you see the value in taking a passive or active role in the process of change? And I'll give you a little bit more context to this. So I've recently, over the last couple of years, started to see something that I used to really give myself a hard time over. I called it procrastination because I didn't have another name for it. But this is generally what would happen I would get a spark or a seed or a little zing of an idea, and I would get kind of a flash of what I thought I would want it to be. And it would be very exciting, just this little jolt of adrenaline. And then almost kind of like a meerkat popping out of its hole, like I would pop out and be like, oh, that would be fun. And then I would immediately burrow back in for however long, because I would get really excited about the idea, but not feel ready to take on the idea. And I would kind of hermit or meerkat. I'm jumping around on my animal analogies, but hopefully that makes sense. But so my narwhal, no, I'm kidding. No, but
whales had to make it in somewhere.
I know I had to find a way to make a whale into this, but this season of procrastination, it's something where I'm sort of willfully denying I had the idea. Like I can think of it with this podcast or going to grad school, or I would get this glimpse of an idea. I would get really excited, but it would almost be like there's a dance partner on the other end of the room, and I would do everything I could to walk through the room to avoid making eye contact with my dance partner because I just wasn't ready to dance. But what I thought for a long time was me procrastinating. That still could be, I could still appropriately call it that, but I used to judge myself for that. And what I realized, I think what I was doing was getting ready to be ready. Mm-hmm. Sort of gathering the energy reserve. And so that's I'm seeing it more now as a passive part of the creative process for me, as opposed to maybe however I may have labeled that or judged that before. And so I'm curious where you see almost kind of like the flexion and the contraction of any movement, or, you have an output and then there's that sort of rest and sort of letting the project breathe. Where do you see value in taking a more passive role and just sort of letting things happen, letting the chips fall, versus taking a more active role and creating more change?
Wow, that's a kind of a really good question, because on the one hand, I've done a bunch of crap.
Yeah, you have. You totally have.
Yeah.
But you also rest well.
Yeah, tend to be too good sometimes at just taking a break. I have friends of mine who are breathing down my neck because my dissertation from when I was in graduate school, it should be a monograph and it should be published. Now, Ball State's not an R1 institution, and so they didn't support scholarship in a way that if I had been teaching at Indiana University or Purdue or something like that, I would have had a far different teaching schedule and my expectations would have been different. At Ball State, teaching was very highly valued, and so any emphasis on pedagogy, especially if you developed a textbook, was prized. It was a good part of the portfolio. Now, I could have also done the monograph, and that would have been just fine, but I wouldn't have been rewarded in the same way had I been at R1.
So a monograph is when you publish
a single author book. And so now that I'm, a full professor and all that kind of stuff, I really have no excuse not to finish that damn book, as some of my friends call it. When do you get done with that damn book? And so that's something that I have been passively letting it marinate for a long time. But, I've been taking steps all along the way. And, I have a firm commitment to myself that I'm going to do it before I retire. So there's at least that for it. But what I've learned from that is that I have been able to gain a perspective that I couldn't have until I'd been at it long enough. I had this great big puzzle about what the kind of the through line to the book would be. And a book is a different thing than a dissertation. It's got to have a lot more structure to it. And in today's publishing world, your chapters have to be almost standalone because the publishing industry is changing. So the publishers that I'm working with, they will publish a book, but they're more interested in downstream applications where the chapters can become available to students. So their business model has changed. And that's allowed me to come to a place where I finally, just a year ago, was able to say, oh, this is what the through line for this needs to be. And this is how it will hold together, which was a question I couldn't have answered earlier. It's a question of time, marination. And I took a research trip. I took 2 research trips a year and a half ago. And so I was able to go and find out information I didn't know. I hadn't ever had the opportunity previously I'd never had a sabbatical before. So that was the first one I had, was 2.5 years ago. So again, it's not really procrastination, but it was like I could have sacrificed other things to get this thing done.
Or is a sabbatical just a really fancy form of procrastination, a very dressed up form of procrastination?
Yeah, well, and you get paid.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's a big difference. Yeah, that's a big difference. Well, so thinking, and this is sort of my last musing on the topic that I wanted to present, but and I think you're a great person to talk to about that because you are in the arts, you're a consumer of the arts, and you create. I talk a lot with clients with regard to therapy and mental wellness or mental health, that there is the science of understanding, or what we're trying to grow into understanding. And then there's the art and the experience and sort of the unnameable or intangible component of it that I think could be really frustrating to people who like to have things labeled and coded. And we really love a diagnosis, and we really love, just this is what it is, and this is what you have.
And this is what I have to do.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And of course, like that framework in a lot of different contexts is great too. But I'm curious where you see, from the approach of either like what you observe in students or what you've personally experienced, sort of the science of the work, like going back to the fundamentals and engaging with the process. And you kind of have to grind it out, and you kind of have to earn your 10,000 practice hours. But then also the art of this sort of unnameable tug to make things or to engage with people when, God, it's so risky to engage with people because people can be really shitty, but that's also where so much magic happens. If there was a Venn diagram of the intellect of it and then also the emotional experience of it, I'm just curious where you see them overlap and where do you see the value in both?
So as you will remember, I myself am happily the product of about 6 or 7 years of therapy myself. I make no bones about it. It changed my life, period. Now, it didn't radically alter who I was or what I was interested in or what my dreams were, but it allowed me to navigate just my own personal life and, more importantly, my love life mm-hmm. in a way that I had never been able to. And so this balance between, I remember doing the work of journaling, taking empty plastic milk jugs and writing the name of or the thing on it and then taking the crap out of it in an empty field, and just various exercises along the way. And the interesting thing is that while I was doing it, I couldn't have told you which things worked. I probably still can't tell you which things worked. I only know that after a while, it worked.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
I'm sort of a fan of my favorite quote from Star Wars. They're in the garbage chute. Luke's got a tentacle wrapped around his leg and he goes, shoot it. And Han Solo says, where? And Luke says, anywhere. and I think the same is true when you're doing a new project that you have no idea how it's going to come out. Mm-hmm. Where do you shoot it? Anywhere. Just start, right? And you're never going to know exactly, especially when you start, what the thing is that will eventually turn it into the thing it becomes.
Oh, yeah.
But after it does that, then you might, if you're lucky, be able to go, oh, that's where we figured it out.
Yeah.
But that's only if you're lucky.
Doing it.
Just doing it.
I think that is the thing that ultimately, that's the dance I'm avoiding in my little procrastination hop. That's usually where I revisit old comfort TV. I'm like, you know what? I wonder how Michael Scott is doing in The Office. I'm going to just revisit seasons 2 and 3 before I tackle this new project. Because ultimately what it does come down to is getting started, and getting started. Oh, it's so good. But then it's also, it's like living this internal game, an eternal game of peekaboo, where I avoid it so much. Like, I avoided relaunching the podcast for so long. I was like, oh, maternity leave, and I was gone. And this podcast is hard, and all stories about technology, like all the things I do to avoid doing the thing that I know eventually I'm going to do. And it's just so much easier. Like, the couch is so accessible all the time. It's always right there waiting for me to sit on it. It's just an open invitation to not have to try. And it's so easy to not try until it becomes more miserable not doing the thing that you want to do. So maybe discomfort is the tipping point that it gets me out of the procrastination dance. I don't know. But yeah, you do just eventually have to get started. And then, like a game of peekaboo, it's like, oh no, where'd it go? Oh, there it is. There's the
thing.
There's the thing that makes this fun. I forgot this was fun. Why was I avoiding it so hard? And then, the wool's over my eyes and I can't see. I'm like, oh God, I'm alone. This is terrifying. And then peekaboo, there it is again. It does forever and ever and ever. It feels like that.
Actually, there's probably no area in life where that sort of tension doesn't exist. I mean, for me, just the morning alarm.
Oh, yeah.
Some days I want to hit snooze for an hour. Other days I can't, and yet I want to. Oh man, I just want to. And so I think the thing, at least for me, the trick is to trick yourself into having some sort of accountability outside yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that is the trick that works for me. I tell someone, I'm going to give you this thing this day, and then I have to.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point. I'm kind of reviewing just a few of a couple of key takeaways. One, it's let yourself fall in love with the process, and let that process just revisit that fundamental. And also, I've also thought of Simon Sinek's work, The Power of Why.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we get so lost in the doing, we forget either why we started or why we're doing it at all. And reintegrating with the why sometimes can help breathe some life back into it.
Yeah, I have a friend who calls it a noble why.
Yeah.
If whatever it is that you're doing, you don't actually care about it in some way, it's going to be so hard for you to do it. But if you care about it, if you have a reason that you consider larger than yourself, to quote George Bernard Shaw, right, then you're not just a quivering clot of ailments wondering why the world hasn't made time to make you more happy.
Ooh, that was a poetic zinger.
Yeah. He goes on to say, life is no brief candle to me. It's a burning torch that once I've got a hold of it, I want to help make burn brighter for future generations when I have to give it up to that. And so I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but the general idea is that if you can devote yourself to a cause greater than yourself, that will not only benefit you, it'll benefit the world. And that's a little bit how I see what you've transformed yourself into.
Aw, you were turning that all into a compliment?
Yes, you've become a devotee of trying to make the world a better place, one person at a time. And that's a truly noble thing to do.
Thank you. That was unexpected and very lovely. Thank you. It's, waking up every day at home and then, turning on your computer. I love when I'm in a therapy session or when I'm doing a podcast, I'm like, oh, this is great. But then it's amazing how quickly the mind becomes like a bad neighborhood you somehow stumbled in and you don't know how you got into this safe part of town, and your mind just becomes not a fun place to be. And so I'm so grateful that I'll get to share some of your key takeaways and stories and insights. And also thank you before I run over that compliment too quickly. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm going to let myself receive it and take that in. Thank you so much. But yeah, just revisiting the fundamentals, connecting with your noble why. And I also I think you made a really great point too, that really looking at how much time you've spent doing the thing and just sort of, is that time you still want to continue devoting to that? It makes me think real quick too, before we hop off, just this idea of time, because we started talking about, whoa, how long has it been? And when was I a student of yours? And but Elizabeth Gilbert in her book, Big Magic, which I've referenced a lot on the podcast, she talks about how a woman, I don't know if it was at her 60th birthday or 70th birthday, she just decided she just became interested in ancient Mesopotamia and started researching it on her own, just because of her own passion. And over the course of a decade, essentially became one of the top most informed people. So she didn't set out kind of like Bernard Shaw. She was self-taught, and became known in this small community, this niche of people who were also interested in that, and became a leader, a thought leader in this obscure part of ancient history. And that was, in her, I don't know how many chapters we're allowed to have, but let's say we get 10 chapters in life. I mean, in her 6th or 7th chapter, if she became an expert. I mean, I think every time you think you're done, there's if you can find maybe not your noble why, but something that sparks life into you.
Yeah. So I'm older than you are, of course. And one of the consequences of that is that both of my parents have now passed. And so I can say with great personal authority that I watched my parents come to a place where they they did not have a reason to go forward other than inertia. And that's when their lives declined.
Wow.
And it happened to my mother first and then my father second. But I could see it now, when you're 90 years old, and it's hard to get a noble why going.
But a reason to wake up. And I mean, but even to bring that to, even if anyone listening isn't thinking about what their final act in life may look like, and who knows what our noble why would be if we're lucky enough to get to that point. But I recently heard, and I really liked the language of it, because there's the clinical language of depression, and there's the visuals that come to mind when we think of some of the kind of comical commercials that are aired when they're advertising for various medications. We think of depression as weepy and curtains drawn. But truly, I think when it is experienced through the individual experiencing depression, it's not sadness, it's apathy.
Yeah.
It's flat.
I would agree with that 100%.
It's not I'm sad. It's I don't really care if I'm here or not. And I don't really care to participate. So a noble why is not only not just important for keeping creativity alive, but it's part of being alive.
Yeah, Shaw has another quote that aligns with that. As long as I have want, I have reason for living. Satisfaction is death.
Satisfaction is death. And damn it, isn't that the trap we are all hooked in? Because nothing is satisfying. But, and in a way, isn't that wonderful? I love that quote. I love that you shared that so much. It's like, I've never had one bite of pasta and thought, well, that's it. No more pasta for me. I'm satisfied.
Yeah. I need to be satisfied. I need to be done. Yeah. But the point is to not have the second bite and still be unsatisfied. It's fine. That's the good part. Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
This was lovely. This was so great. And I'm really looking forward to sharing it and seeing how other people get to experience it and learn, if your 10,000 plus or minus students over the years, they were able to experience you as a teacher. And now, anybody who's listening to this can too.
Oh, well, I hope they gained something out of it. It's been a pleasure reconnecting with you, and I can't wait to meet your son.
He is cute. He's huge. He's a butterball turkey. He's so big. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Don't Cut Your Own Bangs. I want to give a quick and timely shout out that if you are in the area and are looking for something fun to do, Thursday, the 25th, through Sunday, the 28th of April. Grab a ticket, go over to the Muncie Civic Theater and see the latest production of Fiddler on the Roof. Michael personally attests that it is not a production you want to miss. You definitely want to see this. There are some theater and dance alumni there that are really just bringing the house down. It's an incredible production, and you still have an opportunity to see it if you are near or within driving distance to Muncie. Visit the Muncie Civic Theater. The link to the theater is in the show notes. You can click it there directly to grab your tickets while they last, while they're still available. I hope you go see it, and I also hope you continue to have a wonderful day.